I have lived long enough to know that opportunities must be seized or they will be lost.
Welcome back to Wall Street Radio. I'm your host, Tanner Yarton, here with Dan Young. It's the 2nd of February, 2025. And in today's episode, we're going to be discussing my Sunday newsletter, what to look for in the week ahead, what happened in the week in passing, as well as the themes that are currently active in the market and why we're watching them. We're also going to be talking about the tariff implications between the United States, Canada, and Mexico, and anything else that relates to the market for this week. It's earnings, so it's going to be hectic. Let's jump right in. Yeah, that's what it is, Reuters.
No, it's Reuters, not like Hooters.
Come on.
Not, but
people had made fun of me for NVIDIA as well, the way I say NVIDIA.
NVIDIA. Yeah.
NVIDIA.
Yeah. NVIDIA.
I don't know, dude. I don't make the rules. Maybe it's New York. Who knows?
Maybe it is. Yeah. The tariffs are going to be a huge challenge. The most interesting thing is about how's the market going to react. Trudeau already came out. I don't know why he's still talking, but he came out and he said that they're now going to increase their tariffs upon us, and it's going to go back and forth. And then Trump said, well, if you have any type of reactionary event to what I'm doing, I'm going to double it and essentially cripple your nation. So it's heating up. I'm definitely going to watch the Asian markets, the European markets, see how they're reacting. A lot of people are calling for blood. A lot of people are speculating that Trump is trying to create a mini sell-off. I don't know how the market's going to react yet. What's your take?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm going to be watching gold primarily. Gold has been an extremely solid gauge about uncertainty in the market. Coming off of the election, gold had traded down since obviously that was the biggest uncertainty of the last year. And then now that Trump's in office, gold has started to move back up and higher in kind of retaliation to all of the pandemonium that's come from his presidency thus far in just a few short weeks. So that's kind of what I'm watching primarily as like a gauge of how certain the market might be, since that's been a pretty good gauge as of late. Now, when it comes to natural gas, I don't think there's a great understanding of why natural gas is important, number one, but also kind of how it works logistically. So went ahead and did some research earlier this morning just to kind of break down how it works within the United States. So normal gas can be transported on trucks, on trains, on normal avenues of transportation because it's heavy. It doesn't need to be pressurized to be transported. Well, natural gas is a little bit different. So first you have your extraction, which is similar to oil extraction, except you're looking for kind of pockets in the ground. From there, it's processed, removes impurities, normal oil and gas process there. And then when you transport it, that's where it gets interesting. And that's where it relates to Canada so much. Well, we have a very large network of pipelines that transport natural gas around the country. If you get utilities to your house, your water reservoir is probably pretty close by, unless you're in California or one of these kind of drier areas of the United States. But for natural gas, I mean, these pipelines stretch all across the United States and they can be pumped from anywhere and compressed and moved along kind of the supply chain. Well, if we have implications with Canada, all of the companies that own sections of this pipeline or have permission to use sections of this pipeline, it's going to throw a big wrench in the supply chain of natural gas. And that might cause some increase in pricing, as well as opening the door for, these companies to either try and find new solutions, meaning maybe they increase drilling domestically in the Permian Basin down in Texas. And all that is just going to come back to the consumer at the end of the day. So when we're talking about Canadian tariffs and what those impacts are, we don't get very many goods from Canada. Canada is not a big goods producer, but they are a huge portion of our natural gas production, and they're very well versed in our infrastructure for natural gas. So I'm curious to see what comes of that. In any case, though, it's going to ruffle some feathers.
I agree and I disagree, actually. From a goods perspective, I obviously agree with what you're saying from natural gas, but from a consumer goods perspective, like agriculture is hugely brought in by Canada and Mexico, actually. Canada represents a large amount of the grain that we get and the meat that we get. Everyone's making the memes about eggs, but I just went and bought an 18 count of eggs, like nothing special, not homegrown, free range, whatever it is, and it was $7. That was $3.99 about 4 months ago. So that cost is already increasing. But when you look at like what that does overall, the whole Canada plus Mexico picture, there's a huge impact on agriculture. I know Mexico imports the most fruit to us. They import the most vegetables to us. Canada imports by far and above the most livestock and meats, the most sugar, the most poultry. So I'm very curious to see, is this going to spike again food costs? It should, since we pay the tariffs. I imagine that it's going to bring a huge shock to the family dollar and trying to cook meals, which let's see how that plays out. You want to piss off a lot of people, increase the cost of going to the grocery store. I just went like 30 minutes ago. I bought an 18 count of eggs, gallon of milk. What else did I buy? I bought a thing of cheese and a pack of chicken, and it was $45.
Damn.
And I'm not in New York. This is, this is, right now I'm in Charlotte, North Carolina, where historically prices should be lower. I guess this is what I'm trying to say. I'm wondering if Trump is creating a bubble in itself and stimulating a microeconomic crisis to bring about a preserved understanding that our society needs to be back to more local, more state-led, less big government, because this is like the problem that you get when there's so much reliance on other countries. But financially, it doesn't make sense for us to continue those partnerships. I prefer things to be self-sustainable. I prefer local, supporting local farmers. That's just one thing, coming from a family, especially that is in the farm industry, that's something that I've always been passionate about. And so as those families also have to pay the tariffs that are imposed by Canada having this tariff, you know what I mean?
Much of that makes sense. And that's interesting that you talk about how many consumer products we get from Canada and Mexico. And it brings up the question, and I guess it kind of furthers your point about whether or not he's trying to create a little micro, not crash, but like a little bubble pop, because he's taking on multiple fronts at once. He's taking on Mexico, he's taking on Canada, he's taking on China all at once, which from a logical standpoint just seems so dumb. Like, yeah, we have a lot of power as the United States, but we have a lot of power against other nations one-on-one. But as soon as we start to take on multiple of them at once with, the tariff negotiations, it's like it takes away our negotiating power a little bit, because all of these countries together, I'm saying little, I'm putting air quotes, little on their own versus the United States, culminate into a very large kind of a threat against us. So it's interesting that he's trying to take all of this on at once. I understand he's trying to hit the ground running in his presidency, but in the second term, to try and get as much done as fast as possible. But logically, it just doesn't seem like the best strategy to kind of take everybody on at once, when you could piecemeal it out and go one by one if you're trying to instill stability while still negotiating deals and changing the future.
I know you shared with me the Lex Friedman podcast yesterday with Mark Andreessen, and there was a section there where he was talking about the debt increasing $1 trillion every 90 days, and that's only compounding. So soon it's going to be 80 days and 70 days. And, his concern was that the debt's going to spiral into a hyperinflationary state, looking like things that happened in Brazil and
Argentina.
Yeah. So it's like, I definitely understand that concern. That's why I'm for this type of approach where we need to lessen the debt and become more profitable as a society and as a country. The way in which we do it, I'm not sure if Trump thinks he just doesn't have a lot of time. I know that's something he spoke about in interviews, and we've always talked about in general, which is, it seemed like his first 4 years, he was learning a lot about what he did wrong. And now the second term, he kept saying in a lot of interviews, I know what I did wrong the first time. I'm not going to do that. 4 years is not a lot of time. And in many articles, we talk about how he really only has a secure 2 years right now with the House and Senate to run a lot of these initiatives that he wants to. He's really put the foot down on the pedal, and it's hitting the floor, which, again, overall, when you put this on paper, if they're in different chapters, it's very healthy. When it's all in one chapter, it's a lot of risk. The way that this translates to the market is whether the market's going to identify this as well as tremendous risk, and there's going to be a due diligence period and a fiduciary responsibility period to lessen that risk on the shareholders and on anyone that's investing money. Like, are they going to move more to treasuries, more to bonds? I don't know, but the one thing that I do know is Mexico and Canada cannot survive without doing trade with the US. That is very apparent. Everyone has put their cards on the table, and now it's about who blinks first. If I'm Mexico and Canada and I'm playing against the US, and the US has 15x the chips that they do, we just have to wait it out. I mean, that's a simple poker tactic. You can just wait out and buy hands. And, I don't know if that's how many times that's been played out from an
global scale.
On a global scale. But listen, he's doing what he said he would do. I think it's uncomfortable because a lot of us have become complacent with being the good guy. And I am all for Mexican independence. I'm all for like the health of Mexico as well as the health of Canada. I'm obviously an American first and foremost, but I spent a lot of time in New York, like right across the border from Canada. I really respect the country. I do have friends from the area. There's no one that wants to see them worth. That's the thing is like Americans, there's a lot of us and a majority of us want to see Mexico and Canada succeed. The question is, have they been successful? I don't know how I feel about making them 51st and 52nd states. Just like I wasn't really a fan of the whole Greenland initiative that Trump was talking about. I think there's like too much going on at once where he needs to quiet down the noise a little bit and focus on initiating particular game plans and strategies and not just throwing darts at a board, which it kind of seems like he is. Anytime you're pressed for time or you feel pressured, you're not going to make the absolute best decisions. You just possibly can't. Like if you had infinite time, you could always make the best decision.
Right. So you wait it out.
Yeah, exactly. So for this, I just hope that parties come to a mutual agreement that is beneficial for both and that the U.S. is starting to break down this debt, which I know we need to do. And that's protecting ourselves, our families, our sovereignty as a nation. But at the same time, I really hope we don't back Mexico and Canada into a corner saying you have to become a state, because I'm open to change. I don't think that's like a bad thing in the future. I just hope it's mutually agreed upon and it's healthy, right? The last thing any of us want is like a dissatisfied union between Mexico, Canada, and US, where they're now the 51st and 52nd states, but they're not really, it's like they're not fully bought in.
Right. It's kind of like the Puerto Rico situation, which has been ongoing for decades, right? You've got most of Puerto Rico, which enjoys the benefit of being a part of the US, again, doing air quotes here. But if they were to fully integrate as a state, they would lose a lot of the things that they get for free right now. And I wonder if Canada and Mexico feel the same way, where as by not being states, they get a lot of the benefits of being next to the United States without having to take on all of our policies and practices. I think just from a discussion standpoint, there hasn't been a lot of change in the North American continent in so long that all of this seems incredibly daunting. And I think that's why there's a lot of concern, especially in the media. I mean, my feeds are just blowing up about this whole thing, about how much change is going to happen. And while change can be scary at first, it should be welcome to a degree, because, if you don't, you get exactly what happens with our debt right now. Like for the last 4 years, or really for the last few decades, we haven't done quote unquote anything. And that seems fine as the average consumer, because there's no headlines, there's nothing that makes you think, or you don't notice the impacts at the grocery store or the gas pump as much because it's not a big event. Now that it's becoming a big event, but it's kind of mainstream, everybody's freaking out about it. And I'm not sure if that totally made sense there, but because we haven't had change for so long, it kind of lets the problem run astray. And to the average consumer, that problem run astray, you don't feel it because it's, an inch at a time. Now we're kind of building up to this crescendo, and now it feels very impactful all at once.
Change is always uncomfortable, and I see what you're saying, where it's happening all at once, which is why it's uncomfortable. I agree with that, and I think that uncomfortability happens. It happens in relationships. It happens in business. It happens with a lot of different things where we have this anxiety and uncomfortability and unknown about the future. This just feels a little different. At the same time, we kind of have to hold our breath and see what happens and hope that the best interest of the United States sits with the presidency. So like with all of that coming to a head, I mean, we just talked a little bit about what that means to us. There are people around the world that are thinking the same thing about, what does it mean to me individually? And then there's also the big questions. What does this mean for corporations? What does this mean for the agriculture companies, the companies that have reliance in natural gas and energy across the U.S., across international borders? What are you looking at in the market? Talk about that Sunday newsletter you put out and some of the themes that you're eyeing.
Yeah. So one of the core principles that I've been pushing pretty heavily over the last few months since the uncertainty kind of began after the election is what themes, what groups, what ideas permeate the macroeconomic happenings in the world. What needs to happen no matter what. And regardless of who's in office, regardless of what happens with trade or otherwise. And I think there's 3 that I've outlined, especially with Trump, that are pure. Number 1 being Illegals are going to leave this country. That has been one of his greatest kind of talking points throughout all of his election run-ups and discussions and pressers and everything. So that's number one. So all the stuff in relation to that trade, I think, is pure, regardless of what happens with negotiations in Mexico and Canada and otherwise. Number two, Elon Musk is going to Mars. This one's a little bit exaggerated, but shows the point, which is that space funding and exploration has clearly seen a large uptick recently as the population warms to those ideas. I think there was a period of time in the early 2000s where the populace was turned away from space and they thought we were just wasting money going to space and the moon and otherwise. But now I think there's a very large portion of the population that wants to see this further developed. And that kind of group that was like, oh, this is a waste of money is kind of going away. So I think that's number two. That theme and all things relating to that are going to continue to perform well, regardless of, again, what goes on between Trump's pressers. And number three is the United States grid needs bolstering. I guess now we can throw in natural gas in there as well, but electricity, natural gas, we need to bolster our production and our grid to bring down those costs, right? In the short term, this might increase the cost of natural gas, or the AI stuff was going to increase the cost of electricity. But in the long term, it puts pressure on the system to make change. And again, change is uncomfortable at first, but in the long term, it has to be played out to see tangible differences in costs and in the overall well-being of the system as a whole. So those are the three core themes that I've been watching. Those are outlined in the newsletter. I also have crypto in there as a theme to be paying attention to, mostly just because it's quite volatile and it's been a great trade over the last 6 or 7 months. I mean, really over the last year and 6 months, but those are the primaries from the newsletter for this week. Also, just talking about the market, we started the week last week with DeepSeek coming out and the market kind of taking out, like behind the woodshed. And then by the end of the week, we're closing near all-time highs. We've been rejecting 610 pretty consistently. The price on SPY has been rejecting there pretty consistently, and we're kind of in this nice range, which people don't like because that's not a great trading environment. People like to see clean uptrend to kind of be participatory in the market. But personally, all it does is make the diamonds shine even brighter. The ones that are doing really well showcase that during these periods where the broad market is kind of wishy-washy and bouncing all over the place. So continuing to identify themes that are performing well, and then also everything that I mentioned before. Those are my main takeaways moving forward into this week and next. What about you?
Later tonight, I'm going to look at futures and say, is it going to be blood and hell, or is it going to be stabilization and opportunity? You brought up gold earlier. Gold is definitely a good speculation to look at. I think there's going to be a nice safe haven. I think gold miners were the top performing industry in January. They're up 15%.
Really?
Yeah. So they made a nice run. I'm continuing to look at cyber, like in the conversation we posted 2 days ago. Cyber is going to be a big interest for me. I'm not sure yet. Respectfully, I just have to do due diligence on how this agriculture demand is going to play out, especially if the tariffs continue. I imagine there's going to be a lot of talk Monday and Tuesday and back and forth. I wouldn't be surprised if Trump doesn't back down and he doubles it and he says, okay, now it's 50%. And so there could be a lot of reactionary events from Canada and Mexico because they're both stonewalling a little bit on what the tariffs were. There's probably a negotiation happening right now behind the closed doors that we're not going to be privy to until it's finalized. But I'm probably going to be sitting cash and waiting heavily outside of the positions I have. I don't know if I'm going to be taking any positions early on next week. I want to make sure that we're not walking into a mini crisis because I want to be cash heavy at that point.
The only caveat to putting out my newsletter Sunday morning is that sometimes I'll draw up this great piece, write it all out, have all these theses laid out, and then by the 8 p.m. futures open, it's all kaput and none of it means anything, which is a bummer. But it's something that I've had to deal with in the past, and with the Trump administration, it's going to be more common, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, everyone looks bad and wrong in a Trump administration. It just happens. You're always going to be wrong, just like we will always be wrong on a lot of the things we do, just because Trump will come out and it'll change the narrative pretty quickly. All right, I know you want to talk about this. I want to talk about it. It's not Wall Street related, but it's Severance, baby.
The greatest show. That's
greatest show
out of the last few years. We talk about it all the time, and usually during our conversations about the market that we just had prior to the podcast, we were talking about this show as well. So
Yeah, so
yeah,
spoiler alerts are on. If you don't watch Severance or you're not caught up to the recent episode, just skip to the ending because that song is fire. But for those interested in Severance talk, the last episode was huge.
listen, spoilers on,
Spoilers are on.
dude. I think. Well, my first theory that still remains is that the Helly is not Helly. She's Helena for sure.
Well, yeah, that's confirmed. That's
Yeah,
confirmed.
I think after that first episode where there was the switch and she couldn't find it, and then every time they have a conversation, she's like trying to figure it out. And then now in the third episode, her standing next to Mark in the hallway, like I think if that were Helly, they're macking.
No, so it was confirmed in the second episode.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because they purposely have the scene where they're all walking in to the office one by one at the very end of the episode.
Yep.
And after Irving, Helly walks in or Helena walks in and she puts her stuff down. And when she's going up the elevator, she gets in the elevator. When she goes up, there's no ding.
Oh, I
So
didn't
that's,
catch
they like,
that.
yeah, they purposely have the elevator keynotes that go up and it like signifies that they're being severance to their work life. And when she gets in, they zoom in on the elevator like they're like deadpanning and waiting for the ding, and it never happens.
Interesting.
Yeah.
You know, this show brings up an interesting conversation that I saw on Twitter because after every episode, I go straight to Twitter and see all the theories and everything. People enjoy this show because I think a lot of people maybe not resonate, obviously, because they can't have this happen to them, but it's so real. Like Dylan's life, where as an innie, he doesn't know anything about his outside life, and then he goes home and his wife works nights. It's actually just a modern tragedy. Like people go to work and then they get home and maybe their spouse works at different hours from them and then they just can't see them anyway. So it's like a weird, I think a lot of people resonate with that show and either envy the people for being able to cut it off or they see it as like unbelievable that they could even have this happen to them in the first place.
Yeah. So let's answer the question. Would you be severanced?
No. No. And I think part of that's because a lot of my life is like, it's meshed, because
Yeah.
I've been doing this now for a number of years. There isn't like an on and off switch. Like I feel as though my life is just always on. Even when I'm not working, I'm working. Like I always make this joke with my dad. Yeah, whenever we go anywhere, the first thing we're doing is just breaking down the operation that we're in. If we walk into like a little store, like a gift shop or something, we're talking about like, this is ridiculous. So we're going to like a little bakery. We're like, how many loaves of bread does this place have to sell to stay open? Like, how is this business even functioning? So, and then we relate it to the market and, what company might own them or whatever, like any products that we experience in life, who owns this product? So I think from a perspective of logistics, my life, I couldn't do it because so much of my life is just kind of crossed with work.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And you're not going into an office every day.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I walk down the 5 feet from my bedroom to my office door and I hear the ding.
Yeah, you get severance.
Yeah, I can look down the hallway and see the bathroom, but if I walk towards it, I get cut off.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I wouldn't either. Obviously, I've worked in an office. I think it would be intriguing to have that split, but I never would do it because I do like to stay, I like to stay connected. But having said that, I can see why people would do it,
Yeah, I think the point about the show that, again, resonates with a lot of people is people have problems that they're trying to escape from. Mark is trying to escape from the fact that his wife has died. I don't know what I think Dylan just took it because he has trouble finding a job. I think Helly did it because she feels immense pressure on the outside. So she wanted kind of a fresh start where she wasn't so reliant as an Egan. And then Irving, I think his life is just sad and he didn't want to do it anymore. So he wanted to take himself away from that and enter the severed thing. But I mean, for you and I, we don't have any of those issues where we'd really, I think, feel the need to, at least I don't feel the need to disconnect myself from my normal life, from my work life.
Yeah, I agree with that. What is going on with Irving?
I don't know. I mean, he goes to O&D and they say, oh, how do you know about the export wing? So maybe there's more to his character that we don't know. Maybe he's been transferred from another department. Maybe he's one of the files in MDR. I don't know.
He was making that phone call at the phone booth when he was like, and he got the message.
Oh, yeah.
Like that. And Bert was there. Like there's something going on with him that's much bigger to the story.
Yeah, I'm sure there's going to be a whole thing that goes through what Bert and him were talking about when he got cut off. Or I don't know if at the end of season 1, did they have a conversation, or did he get cut off as soon as he got to Bert's house?
He got cut off.
Oh, okay.
He was just knocking on. From what I saw, he was just knocking and pounding on the door, and then he got cut off.
Okay, so maybe or maybe Bert enters the kind of ring, throws his hat into the metaphorical ring of trying to figure out what's going on, because obviously he opens the door and it's Irving, or Irving's Audi, and now maybe he's a little curious himself about what's actually happening. I don't know, but it's a very interesting show, and if anybody hasn't watched, so I definitely recommend it. It's mature, it's intellectual, it makes you think, and it kind of feels like a very long version of Inception.
Yeah, it's very, very good.
And it's a slow burner, which I love as a show. Like I don't like shows that have certain plot points specifically there to move the plot along, like plot devices, whether that be a character or an item or something that is only in the show to move the plot along. I don't think this show has it, which is why I like it so much. Like there are truly episodes that go by where you're like, I hate this show. Like I absolutely hate this show. Like why would they do this? But that's what's interesting about it is there's no fan service.
Yes, I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, so that's our new Sunday segment, the the discussion of Severance from the Thursday night episode.
Yep, the Severance Sunday segment. It's going to be a heater. Like I said, like we both said, tomorrow and tonight you're going to get a good understanding of where futures are, if it's going to be a mini crisis pop, if there's going to be a lot of pessimism about what's happening. We're going to have to get the full story about what exactly the implemented tariffs are going to be, because if we play this back and forth at the table of negotiation where we're just one-upping one another, it's going to go nowhere. And both sides, whether it's Mexico, US, Canada, we all know that. So if you want to be trading around this and speculating around what's going to happen, just make sure there's a lot of due diligence involved in risk mitigation.
Yeah, one other thing I wanted to mention too before we hop off, which is a part of the newsletter, that the parabolic trend analysis this week was Sprouts Farmers Market, and I guess it's a perfect one to discuss this week with the kind of discussions with Mexico and in Canada, the run that they've seen over the last couple of years, and kind of some of the reasons why. I think price increases is obviously most apparent, just naturally that increases margins. In their ability to provide premium products, they've released a number of new private label products over the last year or so. And the consumer has made a notable shift. I don't know if you've noticed this at the grocery store or within your friends or otherwise, but most of my friends now, a normal discussion that we'll have includes a discussion about food, includes a discussion about, what we're eating, what changes we're making to our diets, why we're making those changes. And almost all of them lead to, oh, I've been buying X, Y, and Z product. And for me, at least with my friends, it's always a new product or like something, well, not new because, apples don't change, but it's like, oh, I'm having the organic apples instead of the normal ones for X, Y, and Z reason. I've been doing more research about my diet and what I'm actually putting into my body. And I think boutique grocers like Sprouts are only going to continue to see benefits from this, especially now with RFK in close proximity to the White House. Maybe we'll see even more. What are your opinions on that?
Oh, I completely agree. Small market, farm to table. It is the next wave. It's happening right now. I wouldn't say it's a new wave, but from someone who has thought like that for a long time, I mean, that's why I went in to get my degree in nutrition science. I've always been fascinated with that. When it was not a talked about topic, it's kind of funny that you go on Instagram, you look at all these different things. Everyone's talking about longevity trends or organic this new vitamin or supplement that I'm interested. Like that was not the wave 10 years ago. No one gave a shit about nutrition besides the local community of people. Like in my graduating class of a college that had 50,000 people, there were 30 that got their degree in nutrition science. And I was one of them. And like a lot of those people got it because it was a pre-med accreditation and they would go on to be a doctor, a nurse, whatever it would be. I was just fascinated in nutrition. So it's always an interesting perspective because as we've pushed along in science and data and technology have only increased, we're now in this wave and obsession around youthful energy where people want to stay younger, healthier, fitter for longer, where that was never really a priority back in the day. You think about our parents and our grandparents, it was how do we survive? How do we keep food on the table for our kids? We work 12 hours a day. Life is not supposed to be fun or fit. It's supposed to be hard. And if you live till 75 and your family's healthy and happy and you die, that's expected. This wave of I want to be hiking mountains and running marathons when I'm 60, 70, not just surviving. That is a huge ripple effect across the nutrition space, across the food space. I couldn't agree more. We need depression now fully on the market because, again, this niche, selective, organic, homeopathic, local attitude in communities is only going to grow because, like I said, people are now making money quicker, earlier, more often. They're seeing their parents live longer. They're seeing what true health and fitness aptitude looks like into your 60s and 70s, and they want to be like that. And people are at the end of the day, people are just enjoying life more. You also think about that. My parents and my grandparents, I don't know how much they enjoy life and want to live forever. I think that's an interesting thing is if you take the population and you ask anyone who's 30 and younger, do you want to live forever versus the people who are 50 and older, do you want to live forever? I think it would be something like 90-10. Like the people who are 50 and above, they just never had that mindset because life was just different and it was hard and death was more. This is getting more into a philosophical part of the conversation, but I've had this conversation with business owners before and in a professional setting about the way the market is moving, because when you don't want to die, which a lot of people don't want to die, but there's a difference between the fear of death and acceptance of death. And I feel like because life for a lot of the younger generation has been easier, the fear of death is greater. And trying to escape and run from that is going to be where a lot of their money and their time is spent. You just talked about it. A lot of your friends are talking about what they're eating, what they're consuming, and what it means for their biological state. Yeah. Think about the podcasts that are really popular right now. A lot of them are health and nutrition focused. This hyper focus is only going to grow. It's a huge market. And if that's where people are going to put their time and energy, a market is only as valuable as the consumer who's paying for it. So I think it's a huge area that we should look into. I think Sprouts was one of the huge capitalizers on that. But yeah, I mean, not getting too deep, but again, at the same time, getting deep about it because it is important. It's a huge psychological and philosophical conversation that needs to be had about what products and what markets are going to serve and be successful in the future with the generation that's going to be here for the next 50 to 80 years.
Yeah. And just to add on to that point about Sprouts earlier, another reason I think why people are now more interested in it versus 10 years ago is COVID applied a ton of pressure to e-commerce supply chains. I mean, you saw businesses go from entirely brick and mortar to online pretty much overnight, or else they're now bankrupt or they got bought out by somebody who's a little bit more versed and ready to handle that. So a company like Sprouts, who's made considerable efforts to improve their supply chains and prepare for e-commerce, just gets products that maybe might have been only localized or community-based previously are now able to be accessed all over the country. And when you think about big cities, like you've lived in big cities, I live in a city, but it's not a big one. Those people were pretty much like, they couldn't go down the street to their neighbor and get, farm-raised eggs or get raw honey, local honey. Now, with the improvements of supply chains across the country, thanks to COVID, I think mostly, the access to these products is a lot greater, which just naturally allows people to put more emphasis on it. Because before, if you wanted to have a completely farm fresh, right to table diet, it required a fair bit of effort. Whereas now you're just seeing it in normal grocery stores. And I think a lot of that comes from the improvements of supply chain.
Oh, for sure. Without a doubt. So that's something these are, again, questions that you should be thinking about where society is now, where are we moving to? And that's something that I want to have definitely future podcasts about is it's really working both upstream and downstream, especially around AI.
And I think we could have a whole podcast on that as in and of itself. So I don't think we should get too deep into it, but I think that's a good point to stop for the week ahead. We'll see you guys later.
Now watch this drive.